My name is Rachel Carter, and I'm 30 years old. As I drove toward my childhood home, I felt that familiar knot in my stomach. It's funny how the past never really leaves you. How it sticks like an old song you can't get out of your head. I hadn't been back in 5 years, but the second I made the turn onto our street, it all came rushing back. The overgrown lawn, the crooked mailbox, the faded yellow house with the chipped paint. Nothing had changed. It was still the same small town home I had left behind when I chose a different path. I gripped the steering wheel tighter as my palms began to sweat. The years had been good to me in many ways, but returning home felt like stepping into a time capsule. Back when I was younger, my family couldn't understand why I didn't want to follow the same corporate ladder they were all so obsessed with. I was supposed to follow in my father's footsteps, become a part of the business world, just like my brother Alex. But instead, I went off and joined the military, and that choice had always been seen as a failure, even though I had poured my heart and soul into it. Now here I was, with years of experience in one of the most specialized and prestigious cybersecurity firms in the country. What my family didn't know was that I had recently been promoted to a position that would change everything for them if they ever found out. I parked my car in the familiar driveway and took a deep breath. Tomorrow would be the day. Tomorrow, they'd finally understand what I'd accomplished. But tonight, I had to face one more family dinner, one more round of dismissals and awkward conversations. As I walked through the door, I was immediately hit with the scent of my mother's cooking, a smell that hadn't changed. The house felt smaller than I remembered, and the worn-out furniture seemed to sag under the weight of time. The faded family photos on the wall, the same ones I had stared at when I was a kid, made everything feel like it was stuck in a moment that never moved forward. "Rachel, you made it." My mother's voice called from the kitchen, but she didn't come out to greet me. It was the same disinterested tone I had gotten used to over the years, one that always seemed to carry a hint of disappointment. Not toward me exactly, but toward the life I'd chosen. The life that wasn't the right one in their eyes. I set my bag down and walked through the house, feeling like a stranger in my own home. "Your brother will be here soon," my mother added, as I wandered into the kitchen. "He just got another promotion. Senior project manager now. Can you believe it?" The pride in her voice made it clear that she was already picturing him in a corner office, running the show one day. There was no mention of anything related to my career, not even a question about what I was doing now. It wasn't the first time, and I knew it wouldn't be the last. "That's great," I said, my voice coming out flat. I had said those words so many times before, I didn't even feel them anymore. "I'll have to congratulate him when I see him." She didn't seem to notice my lack of enthusiasm. Instead, she continued talking about Gregory's latest accomplishments, his new house, his promotions, the things that made him the golden child. The conversation was a broken record, and it always left me feeling like I was invisible. I excused myself and headed upstairs to my old room. It still looked the same, a cluttered shrine to a past I no longer felt a connection to. The cheerleading trophies from high school, the academic awards, the college acceptance letters, they were all still there. But there was nothing that celebrated what I had accomplished in the military. Nothing that recognized the years of service, the promotions, or the missions that had shaped who I had become. In their eyes, that was all just a waste of potential. I sat down on my childhood bed, running my hand over the familiar quilt. I closed my eyes and thought back to the night I told my parents about my decision to join ROTC. My father had looked at me like I was a disappointment in the making. "The military's for people who don't have any other options, Rachel," he had said, his voice cold with disbelief. "You're smarter than that." I shook my head, pushing the memory aside. That was then, and this was now. I had worked my way up in the military, gaining recognition for my skills, my leadership, and my expertise in cybersecurity. I had proven myself in ways that none of them could understand. But they still wouldn't acknowledge it. They still didn't believe it mattered. I opened my suitcase and pulled out my military uniform. Tomorrow, Apex Defense Technologies would be hosting a high-level leadership conference, and my father had mentioned that the CEO, Madeline Carter, would be there. What he didn't know was that I was the one overseeing the very project they we're discussing. I was the Pentagon liaison for a $1.2 billion defense contract. And that was about to change everything. I ran my fingers over the Silver Eagle insignia on my uniform, a symbol of my rank, colonel. I had earned that rank faster than almost anyone in my division's history. At 30, I was one of the youngest colonels in the modern army. My expertise in cybersecurity defense had made me one of the most sought-after professionals in my field. But none of that mattered to my family. They didn't know, and they didn't care. I carefully hung my uniform in the closet, making sure to hide it behind some old clothes. Tonight, I would endure one more family dinner of being treated like I didn't matter. Tomorrow, things would be different. The doorbell rang just as I was getting ready to settle in for another round of awkward small talk. I took a deep breath, bracing myself for what was about to unfold. My brother Gregory had arrived. He and Megan, his wife, were the epitome of success in my parents' eyes. Their lives seemed perfect: corporate jobs, big houses, the right friends, and the right connections. I had nothing but admiration for their achievements, but it always felt like a reminder that I wasn't on their level, that I was still the outlier in the family. I made my way downstairs, walking through the hallway. That was lined with old family photos, some of which featured me, but only when I was doing things they approved of. Things like graduating high school, getting accepted to college, but nothing of real substance. No medals, no promotions, no recognition for my service. My parents had never really understood why I chose the military, and they certainly didn't appreciate the years of sacrifice and hard work that went into my career. The dining room felt smaller than I remembered, maybe because this time I felt like an outsider in my own home. My mother was already serving dinner, chatting away about Gregory's latest promotion and Megan's new law firm partnership, as though I didn't exist in the conversation. It was the same every time: her endless praise for my brother, her disinterest in my life. I sat down at the table, trying my best to keep my expression neutral. They didn't know the truth yet, and I wasn't ready to share it with them. Not yet. As usual, my father was more focused on his phone than on the people around him, checking work emails with the same level of detachment he had always maintained. He hadn't even looked up when I entered the room. His career had always been the center of his world, and everything else, including me, was secondary. Gregory, always the center of attention, began the conversation as he always did, talking about his latest promotion, his new responsibilities, and how excited he was to be the lead on a new project. He had the same self-assured, smug look on his face that he always wore when he knew he had won. And once again, my mother was there, hanging on every word. "That's my boy," she said, beaming with pride. I could feel the familiar wave of resentment build in my chest. She had never beamed for me. "Yeah, I heard about the project," I said, keeping my voice even. "It sounds like a big deal." I wasn't sure how else to respond. I didn't have the energy to pretend to care about another one of his corporate victories. The conversation turned back to Gregory's role and the staff he was managing. My mother was practically glowing as she praised him, while I sat quietly, pretending to be interested. 12 direct reports, Gregory was saying, including 2 senior engineers who've been at Apex for years. They're not exactly thrilled to report to someone younger, but they're getting over it. He smiled smugly, and I knew what was coming next. He always had to remind me how much more successful he was than I had ever been. I pushed my food around my plate, trying not to let my frustration show. My brother's life seemed to revolve around a corporate world that had always felt alien to me, but I didn't let it bother me. Not tonight. Tonight was about playing my part and surviving this dinner. Tomorrow, I would show them all. My mother casually mentioned Tiffany, a cousin who worked in finance and always served as the family's measuring stick for success. "Tiffany just closed a multi-million-dollar deal," my mother said, clearly proud. "You should really think about doing something like that, Rachel. You've got the brains for it." I felt the familiar sting. Why couldn't they just accept my career for what it was? I nodded but didn't respond. No amount of explaining would change their minds. They would never understand that my choice to serve in the military wasn't a fallback. It was a conscious decision I had made. a choice that had shaped me into the person I was today. The conversation continued in the same way it always did, with my family discussing their achievements while I sat silently, waiting for the inevitable moment when someone would finally acknowledge my life. But that moment never came. Not until the subject of tomorrow's meeting came up. "Well, tomorrow is the big day," my father said, his eyes lighting up with excitement. "CEO Madeline Carter is coming to review the project. It's a huge deal for Apex. I've been working on this for years, and this contract could finally push me into a senior role." I forced myself to smile, though my mind was already elsewhere. I didn't need to ask what project my father was referring to. I already knew. The military contract, the one I had been overseeing for months, was the reason Madeline was visiting tomorrow. It was the reason I had come home at all. "I'll have to meet with Madeline tomorrow," I said, keeping my tone casual, as though I didn't already have an intimate understanding of the contract. "Oh, Rachel," my mother said, looking up from her plate. "You don't really care about this business stuff, do you? It's just not for you." The dismissiveness in her voice was like a slap to the face, but I kept my cool. This wasn't the time to argue. Tomorrow would be different. I didn't tell them the truth about my position, about how I was in charge of this contract, how I was overseeing the very project they were discussing. My family didn't know that I had been promoted to colonel in the army, the youngest in my division. They didn't know that I held final approval on everything from technical specifications to budget allocations. The evening continued as it always had, awkward, uncomfortable, and distant. But deep down, I knew that tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, I would show them who I had become. The evening dragged on, and I retreated to my childhood bedroom when it was finally over. The sounds of my parents praising Gregory's accomplishments and dismissing mine echoed down the hallway as I lay in bed. The familiar glow of the stars my mother had stuck to the ceiling all those years ago comforted me. It was strange to think of how much had changed since I was a kid, how much I had grown. Yet here I was, back in the same house, hearing the same judgments from the same people. It was hard not to feel resentful, but I had learned not to seek their approval anymore. What mattered now was my career, my accomplishments, and the family I had built outside of this place. Sleep came slowly, my mind replaying the day's events, the dinner, the dismissals, the subtle digs. I tried to silence the anger, but I knew tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, they would finally see what I had built. Tomorrow, they would learn just how far I had come, and it would be impossible for them to ignore any longer. I didn't sleep well that night, restless with anticipation. When I finally closed my eyes, I had only a few hours of sleep before my alarm rang, signaling the start of the day that would change everything. I got out of bed and went through the familiar motions of getting ready, preparing my uniform with the same attention to detail I had used countless times before. The weight of the colonel insignia felt different now, heavier somehow, like it carried the weight of every year of sacrifice, every achievement, every moment that had led to this day. As I pinned the silver eagle to my collar, I reminded myself that this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving them wrong. This was about finally showing them who I had become, and perhaps, for the first time, allowing them to see me as I truly was, someone worthy of respect. I glanced at my reflection one last time before leaving my room. This time, I didn't see the girl who had once desperately sought her family's approval. I saw someone stronger, someone who had earned her place, no matter how long it had taken. The drive to Apex Defense Technologies was short, only about 15 minutes, but every second felt like a reminder of what I had to prove today. The sleek, modern buildings of Apex loomed ahead, their glass facades gleaming in the morning light. I pulled into the reserved parking spot labeled Military Liaison and sat for a moment in my car. The weight of my responsibilities settled onto my shoulders, but it didn't feel heavy in a bad way. It felt right. This was where I belonged, not at the dinner table in my childhood home, not as the disappointed daughter, but here leading a $1.2 billion project that had the potential to change national security. As I walked through the front entrance of Apex, I couldn't help but notice the shift in the atmosphere. Security guards stood at attention, recognizing my uniform immediately. I was used to that by now. What I wasn't used to was the feeling of power, of authority that came with it. Every eye in the room seemed to follow me as I walked toward the elevator, where I could feel the shift in the air. The questions, the curiosity. This was a corporate world where military officers of my rank rarely visited, especially not ones as young as me. But that didn't matter. I had earned my place here, and today, I would prove it. When I reached the executive floor, I was surprised to see Gregory standing in front of the conference room, reviewing his notes on a tablet. He looked up when I approached, his casual expression faltering when he saw the uniform. The recognition hit him like a brick. "Rachel? What are you doing here?" His voice held a hint of panic, but I wasn't bothered. This was my moment. "Good morning, Gregory," I said, my voice calm and professional. "I'm here for the project review." Before he could respond, my father turned the corner, talking to a couple of senior executives. When he saw me, his words caught in his throat. His face shifted from surprise to confusion and then to concern, but there was something else there, something new. Recognition? Perhaps even a flicker of respect. "Rachel," he said, clearly rattled, "what is going on? Why are you in uniform?" "Dad," I said, keeping my tone level, "I'm here to review the project. The meeting starts in 20 minutes. I could see the wheels turning in his head as he processed the information. It wasn't just a casual meeting. It wasn't just a small military liaison. No, this was bigger. I was the one overseeing the project. I was the one calling the shots. The executives who had been walking with my father paused when they saw my rank. One of them, a woman named Barbara Jenkins from legal, stepped forward and extended her hand. "Colonel, it's an honor to have you here today," she said with genuine respect. As I shook her hand, I glanced across the room and caught my father's eye. His expression was one of shock, realization, and something else, something I hadn't seen from him in a long time. But it wasn't just him. It was Gregory, too. They hadn't realized that I had already risen higher than they ever imagined. They hadn't understood just how much power I held in this world, a world that they had always thought I was excluded from. I nodded to Barbara and continued walking toward the conference room. Behind me, I could hear the murmurs, the shock, the realization that the person who had always been underestimated had just entered the room as a leader, as a professional, and as someone who had earned the respect of the people in this building. As I entered the conference room, I could feel all eyes on me. The room, normally filled with the highest-ranking executives and officials, seemed to shift its focus as I walked in. There was no mistaking it: the uniform, the Silver Eagle insignia, the rank that I had earned through years of hard work. It all spoke for itself. I could hear whispers from the back of the room, the sudden realization dawning on those who didn't know me yet. But it wasn't just the executives who were taken aback, it was my family. My father, standing off to the side, looked like he'd seen a ghost, his face drained of color. Gregory, too, was staring at me, his usual confidence completely evaporated. I walked to my seat at the front of the room, where the military liaison usually sat. The chair reserved for me was a subtle reminder of my place in this world, a world my father had never fully understood, and yet here I was, front and center. I settled into my seat, reviewing my notes. My presence had shifted the entire energy of the room. Conversations that had been happening before my entrance ceased. It was clear they were all waiting for me to speak. Gregory was the first to regain his composure. He cleared his throat, obviously uncomfortable, and took his place at the front of the room. His presentation began like it always did: smooth, confident, rehearsed. But as the minutes passed, I could see the cracks forming. His voice wavered slightly when he mentioned aspects of the project that were directly tied to my department, my decisions. I couldn't help but notice the nervous glance he shot me, probably unsure whether to continue or to change his approach now that he knew who was really in charge. I didn't let it faze me. The project required thorough analysis, and I wasn't going to let anything slip through the cracks just because my brother was presenting. So, I asked the questions that needed asking, pointed technical questions that exposed the gaps in his planning. It wasn't about putting him down, it was about ensuring the integrity of the work we were all doing. These are important considerations that need to be addressed before we can approve this phase, I said, my voice steady and confident. Please submit revised specifications by the end of the week. The room fell silent. My father's face was unreadable, but I could see the tension in his posture. He was watching the sibling dynamic unfold, but for the first time, he wasn't in control. I wasn't his little girl anymore, and I wasn't the failure he had always seen me as. The meeting continued with updates from the rest of the team. My input, though, carried weight that none of them had expected. As each presenter spoke, they acknowledged my authority over the military aspects of the project. And with every technical question, the room turned to me for answers. The respect in the room was undeniable, and I could feel my family's perception of me shifting slowly, but surely. But it wasn't until Gregory's portion of the presentation came up that things really began to change. He stood at the front, visibly flustered, his normally confident voice faltering as he tried to make his case for his team's user interface design. I watched him stumble through his slides, his eyes constantly flicking to me, as if searching for validation. But that wasn't what he was going to get. Not from me. Not today, Gregory. These are important details, I said, my tone still calm, but firm. We need to ensure the system integrates seamlessly with the military infrastructure. If it doesn't, we're looking at delays, and that's the last thing we need right now. Gregory froze. His face turned pale. It was clear the confidence he had shown just hours before, sitting at our family dinner table, had completely evaporated under the weight of the truth. He had been so sure of himself, so certain that his position in the corporate world gave him the edge. But today, the corporate world and the military world collided, and it was me who had the final say. The meeting lasted for hours. As the team wrapped up, Madeline Carter, the CEO of Apex, stood and addressed the room. She praised the work done by everyone involved, but she made one thing very clear. Colonel Rachel will remain on site through tomorrow to conduct security assessments, she said. I expect everyone to provide her with whatever information and access she requires. This project is critical to national security and to Apex's future. For the first time, my father didn't say a word. My brother, too, fell silent. The realization had sunk in. This was no longer a world where they called the shots. This was my world now, and they were just living in it. As the meeting wrapped up and everyone started to leave, I could feel the shift in the atmosphere. My father, still processing what had just happened, hung back. Gregory, too, was unusually quiet, still trying to make sense of the sudden reversal of roles. They hadn't expected this. None of them had. Madeline Carter, the CEO of Apex, approached me with a warm smile. Colonel Rachel, she said, extending her hand, I must say, your reputation is well deserved. General Harris speaks very highly of you, and after seeing you in action today, I can see why. You really are a force to be reckoned with. I stood, shaking her hand with a professional yet pleased smile. Thank you, Madeline. I appreciate the recognition. It's been a long road, but I'm glad to see the results are speaking for themselves. I could see my father lingering in the background, still trying to figure out how to process everything he had just witnessed. For the first time in my life, I didn't need his approval. I didn't need anyone's approval. But there was something about the way he stood there, conflicted and hesitant, that made me realize this was a moment of reckoning for him too. He wasn't just my father anymore. He was the man who had doubted me for so long, but today, he was seeing the truth of what I had accomplished. The room slowly began to empty, with only a few senior executives remaining to chat with Madeline. I took a deep breath and turned toward the exit. But as I did, my father made his move. He walked toward me, hesitant at first, but with a look in his eyes that I had never seen before. Rachel, he began, his voice lacking its usual confidence. We need to talk. I nodded, my heart racing. I knew this conversation was coming, but I didn't know how it would unfold. I had been prepared for this moment, but nothing could fully prepare me for what my father would say. As the last few executives filed out of the room, I turned to face him. Gregory stood nearby, his arms crossed, still processing everything that had just unfolded. He was waiting for me to explain myself, or perhaps waiting for something to happen that would make sense of it all. Rachel, my father said again, his voice softer now. I don't even know where to start. I've spent so many years thinking that I knew what was best for you. And I was wrong. I was wrong to dismiss your choices. You've done more than I ever expected. There was a pause. And for the first time, I saw my father struggle with words. I'm proud of you, he said quietly. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm proud of you. The words hit me harder than I expected. After everything, after all the years of his disapproval, hearing him say those words felt like a weight lifting from my chest. But it wasn't just about his pride. It was about him finally seeing me for who I truly was, not the daughter he had wanted, but the woman I had become. Gregory, who had been standing in the corner of the room with his arms crossed, finally spoke up. His voice was hesitant, almost unsure. You outrank me, he said, his eyes meeting mine. A mix of surprise and something else in his gaze, respect, maybe even awe. I guess I always thought I had it all figured out, but what you're doing, I couldn't do that. I never realized how much it takes to do what you do. I wasn't expecting an apology, not from him. But in that moment, I saw the sincerity in his eyes. It wasn't the corporate rivalry we'd had for years. This was something real, something that mattered. It's not a competition, Greg, I replied, my voice steady. But I appreciate you saying that. My father shifted, clearly uncomfortable but trying to find a way to make up for lost time. You could have warned us, Rachel, he said, his voice edged with frustration. You could have told us what you were really doing. I sighed, shaking my head. Would it have mattered? I asked quietly. You never showed any real interest in what I was doing. You always assumed it wasn't important. There was a long pause. My father seemed to search for the right words, but I could see the regret in his eyes. It wasn't just about the promotion or the contract anymore. It was about the years of misunderstandings, the years of me trying to prove myself in a family that never saw me for who I truly was. I should have been there for you. My mother finally spoke, her voice uncharacteristically soft. I should have asked. I should have cared more about your life, your career. She glanced at my father, her expression conflicted, as if she too was coming to terms with the fact that they had failed to truly see me. I'm sorry, Rachel, she added, her voice thick with emotion. I didn't know. We didn't know. I looked at her, taking in her words. I had never expected an apology from her, but in that moment, it felt like a small step toward healing. It's okay, Mom, I said gently. It's a long road, but we'll get there. Gregory looked at me, still processing everything. So, what now? He asked, his voice quieter now, like he was trying to wrap his head around the new reality. I took a deep breath. Now, we move forward, I said. I'll still be doing my job, still overseeing this project, but maybe, just maybe, we can start seeing each other as equals. I'm not the failure you thought I was. I've proven myself, and I will continue to. But I won't be waiting for your approval anymore. As we wrapped up our conversation, my father extended his hand, a sign of something I had never seen from him before: respect. Colonel Rachel, he said, his voice still carrying that thick emotion. I owe you an apology. I should have been proud of you from the start. I was wrong about everything. I took his hand, feeling a sense of closure that I hadn't realized I needed. Thank you, Dad, I said, my voice steady. I'm just glad we're finally having this conversation. The rest of the evening passed with a sense of quiet resolution. My family, though still awkward in their newfound understanding, had started to shift. Months later, I hosted my family at my apartment in Washington, D.C. It wasn't the same as the house I grew up in, but it was mine, my sanctuary, built through my own efforts. It was a space that reflected who I had become. My father arrived first, carrying a framed article about the success of Project Aegis. The article featured a photo of me in uniform, standing proudly next to General Harris and Madeline Carter at the project launch. I thought you might want this for your wall, my father said shyly, holding it out to me. I was taken aback. It wasn't just the article. It was the fact that my father had cared enough to acknowledge my accomplishments in a way I had never expected. Thank you, Dad, I said, genuinely touched. I'll hang it up, My mother arrived next, bringing my childhood favorite apple pie. Her attempt at connecting was still a little awkward, but sincere. "Your apartment is lovely, Rachel," she commented, glancing around at the minimalist decor. "So neat and organized, military precision," I joked, and for the first time, she laughed instead of turning it into a critique. It felt nice. When Gregory and Megan arrived, there was an ease between us that hadn't existed before. My brother, ever the corporate climber, was different now. After the shock of seeing me in action, he had come to respect me in a way I never thought he would. Over dinner, my father, still looking a bit uncomfortable, spoke up. "I read that article about the cyber attack you helped prevent last year, Rachel." I didn't understand all the technical details, but it sounded significant. "It was," I confirmed. "We caught it early. Lives were at stake." My father nodded thoughtfully. "I always thought the military was about physical combat," he said slowly. "I never considered the cyber battlefield." "Most people don't," I replied. "That's what makes it effective. Enemies don't always see us coming." The conversation flowed more easily now, with everyone genuinely interested in what I had to say. As dessert was served, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. We were still a work in progress, but for the first time, my family was seeing me for who I truly was. "To Colonel Rachel," my father said, raising his glass with a newfound pride, "who proved that following your own path can lead to extraordinary places." I smiled, raising my glass. "To moving forward," I said softly, and for the first time in a long time, I felt that my path, my choices, were finally validated. Not by them, necessarily, but by me. And that was enough. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever faced similar challenges or moments of doubt, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and share your experiences. I'm sure there are many of us out there who can relate. And if you enjoyed this journey of resilience and triumph, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel.